The sound of expensive heels echoed through the sterile corridors of St. Catherine's Medical Center as Brielle Montgomery, CEO of Montgomery Industries, pushed her 9-year-old daughter Camille's wheelchair with trembling hands. The diving accident had stolen more than Camille's ability to walk. It had shattered a mother's world. The spinal damage is too severe, the neurologist had whispered that morning. She'll never walk again. Just as Brielle's composure finally cracked, a gentle voice cut through her despair. "Excuse me," said the man in paint-stained work clothes, a young boy clutching his hand. "I know this sounds crazy, but I think I can help your daughter walk again." The janitor's confident words seemed impossible, but something in Lucas Thompson's eyes made Brielle pause. She had no idea that this single father's unconventional methods would not only restore her daughter's legs, but change their lives forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The polished marble floors of St. Catherine's Medical Center reflected the harsh fluorescent lights as Brielle Montgomery navigated her daughter's wheelchair through the maze of corridors. Each squeak of the wheels seemed to echo the devastating diagnosis that had just shattered her world into a million irreparable pieces. Camille sat motionless in the wheelchair, her once vibrant 9-year-old spirit now dimmed to a mere shadow. The diving accident at the country club 3 weeks ago had happened so fast. One moment, she was laughing with friends at the pool's edge. The next, she was lying motionless at the bottom after hitting the shallow end at a dangerous angle. The paramedics had worked frantically. The helicopter ride to the trauma center had been a blur of medical equipment and desperate prayers. And now they sat with the finality of Dr. Harrison's words still ringing in Brielle's ears. The spinal cord injury is complete at the L1 level, the neurologist had explained with clinical detachment, pointing to X-rays that might as well have been written in a foreign language. "I'm afraid there's no realistic possibility of recovery. Your daughter will never walk again." The weight of those words had hit Brielle like a physical blow. As CEO of Montgomery Industries, she was accustomed to solving problems, finding solutions, making impossible things happen through sheer determination and resources. But this was beyond her control, beyond her considerable influence, beyond everything she thought she could fix with enough money or connections. Camille hadn't spoken much since the accident. The bright, talkative girl who once filled their Beacon Hill penthouse with laughter and endless questions had retreated into a silence that terrified Brielle more than any board meeting or hostile takeover ever could. Her daughter's eyes, once sparkling with mischief and wonder, now held a vacant acceptance that number 9-year-old should ever possess. "Mrs. Montgomery?" The voice was soft, hesitant, but somehow cut through the fog of despair that had enveloped them. Brielle looked up to see a man in his early 30s, wearing paint-splattered work clothes and a worn baseball cap. His hands were stained with what looked like primer or drywall compound, and a young boy of about 7 stood beside him, clutching the man's calloused hand with obvious trust and affection. "Excuse me," the man continued, his voice carrying an unexpected confidence despite his humble appearance. "I know this might sound completely crazy, but I couldn't help overhearing the doctor. I think I might be able to help your daughter walk again." The audacity of the statement from someone who looked like maintenance staff should have been offensive, even laughable. But something in Lucas Thompson's steady gaze made Brielle pause. There was a depth there, a quiet certainty that seemed entirely at odds with his appearance. His companion, the young boy with curious dark eyes and an old-fashioned politeness, watched the interaction with the kind of attentiveness that suggested he'd witnessed his father offer help like this before. "I know how this must look," Lucas continued, seemingly reading her skeptical expression. "A guy covered in paint making promises about spinal injuries. But I've seen what seems impossible become possible. Sometimes the answers aren't where we expect to find them." Camille, who had barely acknowledged anyone's presence for days, suddenly looked up with the first spark of interest Brielle had seen since the accident. The young boy beside Lucas stepped forward slightly, offering a small, encouraging smile that somehow managed to reach Camille in a way that weeks of concerned adult faces hadn't. Brielle felt her carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. The powerful executive who commanded respect in boardrooms across the country was just a terrified mother willing to grasp at any hope, no matter how unlikely the source. She found herself studying Lucas's face more carefully, searching for any sign of delusion or manipulation, but finding instead a calm sincerity that was both unsettling and oddly comforting. "Trust me," Lucas said simply, his words carrying the weight of someone who understood exactly how much he was asking. Brielle Montgomery had never imagined herself running a manufacturing empire. With her Harvard MBA and background in venture capital, she had planned to revolutionize the startup world, not navigate the complexities of industrial production and supply chains. But life had other plans when her father, renowned industrialist William Montgomery, suffered a massive heart attack during a crucial merger negotiation 4 years ago. At 32, she had become one of the youngest female CEOs of a Fortune 500 company, inheriting Montgomery Industries along with its 12,000 employees and its reputation as one of the most innovative manufacturing companies on the East Coast. The transition had been brutal. Skeptical board members who questioned whether someone so young could handle the responsibility, competitors who saw weakness in the leadership change, and employees who wondered if the boss's daughter truly understood the business that had been built over 3 generations. Brielle had proven them all wrong through sheer force of will and an almost supernatural ability to outwork everyone around her. She arrived at the office before dawn, stayed until well past dinner, and spent weekends studying production reports and market analyses with the same intensity she had once applied to case studies. The company not only survived her father's sudden death but thrived under her leadership, expanding into new markets and developing cutting-edge manufacturing processes that had earned them contracts with major automotive and aerospace companies. But success had come at a personal cost. Her marriage to tech entrepreneur David Clark had crumbled under the pressure of her demanding schedule and his inability to handle her sudden elevation to corporate royalty. The divorce had been as civilized as expensive lawyers could make it. But it left Brielle as a single mother trying to balance the demands of running a major corporation with raising a spirited daughter who needed more attention than Brielle's schedule typically allowed. Camille had been the light of her life, the one person who could make her forget about quarterly earnings and production targets. Their Saturday morning breakfasts at the country club, their spontaneous shopping trips on Newbury Street, and their quiet evenings reading together in the penthouse library had become sacred time that Brielle protected fiercely from the demands of her professional responsibilities. The diving accident had happened during one of these precious mother-daughter moments. They had been at the Brookline Country Club for their usual weekend swim, and Camille had been showing off her new diving skills for a group of friends. Brielle had been reviewing quarterly reports on her tablet, always working, even during leisure time when the screaming started. By the time she looked up, Camille was already at the bottom of the pool, motionless in the shallow water where she had misjudged the depth. The guilt was overwhelming. If she had been watching instead of working, could she have prevented it? Could she have warned Camille about the shallow end? The what-ifs plagued her during endless nights at Camille's bedside, watching monitors and praying for signs of improvement that never came. In the weeks following the accident, Brielle had exhausted every resource at her disposal. She had flown in specialists from Johns Hopkins, consulted with renowned spinal injury experts from Switzerland, and even arranged for experimental treatments at cutting-edge facilities in Japan. Each consultation had ended the same way: sympathetic, but realistic assessments that confirmed Dr. Harrison's original diagnosis. The spinal cord damage was simply too severe. The woman who had built her reputation on finding solutions to impossible problems was facing the one challenge that couldn't be overcome with determination, money, or connections. For the first time in her adult life, Brielle Montgomery felt truly helpless, and that helplessness was eating away at her from the inside. Her company was suffering too. She had delegated more responsibilities to her management team, but her attention was scattered between board meetings and medical appointments, between quarterly projections and physical therapy sessions. The employees who had come to respect her unwavering focus now saw a leader who was clearly struggling to maintain the intensity that had made Montgomery Industries so successful. But none of that mattered compared to watching her daughter's spirit slowly dying. Camille, who had once been fearless and full of dreams about becoming a marine biologist or an Olympic swimmer, now spent her days staring out windows with a resignation that broke Brielle's heart. The specialists talked about adaptation and acceptance, about learning to live with limitations. But Brielle couldn't accept that her vibrant daughter was destined for a life defined by what she couldn't do rather than what she could achieve. Lucas Thompson moved through the world with the quiet confidence of a man who had learned to find purpose in unexpected places. At 34, his weathered hands told the story of someone who had worked hard for everything he'd ever earned, but his eyes held depths that suggested experiences far beyond construction sites and renovation projects. Most people seeing him in his paint-stained work clothes and scuffed boots would never guess that less than 5 years ago, those same hands had been performing delicate neurosurgery at Massachusetts General Hospital. Lucas had once been considered one of the most promising young neurosurgeons in New England, a prodigy who combined exceptional technical skill with an intuitive understanding of the human nervous system that amazed even his most experienced colleagues. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. His specialty had been pediatric spinal trauma, the most challenging and heartbreaking cases in neurosurgery. While other surgeons avoided these complex procedures because of their low success rates, Lucas had been drawn to them precisely because they seemed impossible. He had developed innovative surgical techniques that had restored mobility to dozens of young patients, whose cases had been considered hopeless by other specialists. The transformation in his life had begun with a single case, a 7-year-old boy named Michael, who had suffered a severe spinal injury in a car accident. The boy's parents, immigrants from Guatemala who spoke little English, had been told by multiple doctors that their son would never walk again. When they were referred to Lucas as a last resort, he saw something in the injury pattern that others had missed, a small possibility for recovery that conventional wisdom saw didn't exist. The surgery had been successful beyond anyone's expectations. Michael had not only regained the ability to walk, but had eventually returned to playing soccer with his friends. But the case had triggered something in Lucas that went beyond professional satisfaction. He began studying alternative approaches to spinal rehabilitation, exploring connections between neuroplasticity and unconventional therapies that most medical professionals dismissed as unproven. His research had led him to Dr. Patricia Hernandez, a researcher at MIT who was investigating the relationship between emotional healing and physical recovery in spinal injury patients. Dr. Hernandez had theorized that traditional rehabilitation approaches, while technically sound, often failed to address the psychological barriers that prevented the nervous system from fully recovering its function. Together, they had developed a revolutionary approach that combined cutting-edge medical intervention with what could only be described as emotional rehabilitation. Their methods included music therapy, pet-assisted recovery, and most controversially, the involvement of peer mentors, other young patients who could provide hope and encouragement in ways that adult medical professionals couldn't match. Their first clinical trials had shown remarkable results. Patients who had been written off as permanent paraplegics were regaining sensation and movement. Medical journals were beginning to take notice of their work, and Lucas was being invited to present their findings at international conferences. Then, tragedy had struck with devastating suddenness. Dr. Hernandez, who had become not just his research partner, but his closest friend and the woman he had hoped to marry, was killed in a car accident while driving to a conference where they were supposed to present their latest breakthrough. The accident had happened on a rainy night in Vermont, and Lucas had been following in a separate car with their research materials. When he saw the truck that ran the red light, the loss had shattered more than just his personal life. Without Dr. Hernandez's academic credentials and institutional support, their research was suddenly viewed with skepticism by the medical establishment. Colleagues who had praised their innovative approaches began questioning methods that seemed too unconventional, too dependent on factors that couldn't be easily quantified or replicated. The final blow had come when the hospital administration, concerned about liability and reputation, had quietly discouraged Lucas from continuing his experimental approaches. The message had been clear: stick to conventional treatments or find somewhere else to practice. Faced with the choice between abandoning the work that had given his career meaning or leaving the prestigious position he had worked so hard to achieve, Lucas had chosen to walk away entirely. His nephew Jason, Dr. Hernandez's 7-year-old son, who had been living with Lucas since his mother's death, had become his constant companion and the only family he had left. The boy had inherited his mother's intuitive understanding of human emotion and pain, showing a remarkable ability to connect with people who were struggling that sometimes surpassed trained therapists. Lucas had moved to Boston, taken work in construction and building maintenance, jobs that allowed him to support Jason while staying close to the medical community, where he could occasionally help people in unofficial ways. His current job doing maintenance and construction work at St. Catherine's Medical Center was more than just employment. It was his way of staying connected to the world of healing without the politics and limitations of institutional medicine. The past 2 years, Lucas had quietly helped several families whose cases had been deemed hopeless by conventional medicine. Working without official recognition or institutional support, he had developed methods for reaching patients that combined his surgical expertise with the emotional healing approaches he and Dr. Hernandez had pioneered. Jason had become an integral part of these informal treatments, his natural empathy and lack of adult prejudices allowing him to connect with patients in ways that traditional therapy couldn't achieve. When Lucas had overheard the diagnosis for Camille Montgomery, something in the description of her injury had immediately reminded him of cases he had successfully treated before. The pattern of spinal damage, the specific location of the trauma, the patient's age and general health, all factors that conventional medicine would classify as hopeless, but that Lucas recognized as potentially treatable with the right approach. Suggestion from a maintenance worker that he could help where teams of world-renowned specialists had failed should have been immediately dismissed as the delusion of someone who clearly didn't understand the complexities of spinal cord injury. Briel's first instinct was exactly that: to politely but firmly reject this inappropriate intrusion into her family's private medical crisis. "I appreciate your concern," she began, using the same tone she employed when dismissing unsolicited business proposals. "But we're working with the best specialists in the country. Dr. Harrison is internationally recognized for his expertise in spinal trauma, and we've consulted with leading experts from Johns Hopkins and the Mayo Clinic." Lucas nodded respectfully, seemingly unperturbed by her dismissal. "I understand. Dr. Harrison is indeed excellent. I've read several of his papers on spinal cord regeneration. His conventional approaches are textbook perfect." He paused, his gaze moving to Camille, who was listening with more attention than attention. She had shown anything in weeks. But sometimes textbook perfect isn't enough. The quiet confidence in his voice made Briel pause. There was something about the way he spoke about Dr. Harrison's work, not with the dismissive criticism of a crank, but with the respectful disagreement of someone who actually understood the medical literature. Most people, when challenged about their qualifications to discuss complex medical issues, would become defensive or begin spouting obviously superficial knowledge gleaned from internet searches. And you think you understand spinal injuries better than doctors who have spent decades specializing in this field? Brielle asked, her tone carrying the edge that had made opposing lawyers and business rivals retreat in negotiations. Not better, Lucas replied calmly. Differently, Dr. Harrison approaches spinal injuries as mechanical problems: fix the damaged tissue, remove the obstacles to nerve conduction, follow established protocols for rehabilitation. He's right to do that. It's what medical training teaches, and it works for many patients. He gestured toward Camille, who was now looking directly at him with obvious curiosity. But some patients need more than mechanical repair. They need someone who understands that the spine isn't just a collection of nerves and vertebrae. It's part of a system that includes the brain, the emotions, the spirit. When that entire system is traumatized, healing requires addressing all the components, not just the physical damage. Brielle felt a flicker of uncertainty. The way he described the interconnection between physical and emotional healing resonated with something she had observed during Camille's treatment. The girl's physical therapy sessions had been technically proficient, but there had been no spark, no engagement. Camille went through the motions with the same passive compliance she showed for everything else, as if she were cooperating with a process she didn't believe could help her. Even if what you're saying has merit, Brielle said, still skeptical but no longer quite as dismissive. What makes you think you have the expertise to address these broader aspects of spinal injury? Before Lucas could answer, Jason stepped forward with the kind of innocent boldness that only young people possess. My dad helped lots of people walk again when we lived in Cambridge, he said matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. He's really good at figuring out what people need to get better. The simple confidence in the boy's voice was somehow more convincing than any medical credentials could have been. Brielle found herself studying Lucas more carefully, looking for signs of the charlatan she had expected to find, but seeing instead a man whose quiet assurance seemed to come from genuine experience rather than false bravado. You said you lived in Cambridge? She asked, her investigative instincts from years of business due diligence beginning to engage. I worked at Mass General for several years, Lucas admitted. Pediatric neurosurgery. I specialized in spinal trauma cases, particularly complex injuries that other surgeons considered inoperable. The revelation hit Brielle like a physical shock. Mass General was one of the most prestigious hospitals in the country, and pediatric neurosurgery was among the most demanding and selective specialties in medicine. Someone who had worked in that environment was no maintenance worker offering folk remedies. He was a trained medical professional, whose current circumstances raised more questions than they answered. If you're a neurosurgeon, why are you working in building maintenance? She asked bluntly. Lucas's expression grew more serious, and she could see him weighing how much to reveal. I left conventional medicine because I found that the most effective treatments for certain types of injuries weren't the ones that medical institutions were comfortable supporting. Sometimes helping people requires stepping outside the boundaries of what's considered acceptable practice. The answer raised as many questions as it addressed, but it also explained the strange combination of medical knowledge and humble circumstances that had initially seemed so contradictory. Brielle had encountered enough brilliant people in her business career to recognize the type individuals whose expertise was genuine, but whose approaches were too unconventional for traditional institutions to embrace. What exactly are you proposing? She asked, her tone shifting from skeptical dismissal to cautious interest. Let me spend some time with Camille, Lucas said simply, not replacing her current treatment, just supplementing it. One session, here at the hospital where she's comfortable, with her medical team aware of everything we're doing. If there's no positive response, I'll walk away and not bother you again." Brielle looked at her daughter, who was now sitting up, straighter in her wheelchair and paying attention to the conversation with more engagement than she had shown since the accident. The change in Camille's demeanor was subtle but unmistakable for the first time in weeks. There was a spark of curiosity in her eyes. "One session," Brielle said finally, her voice carrying both hope and warning. "Under medical supervision, with Dr. Harrison's approval. And at the first sign that this is some kind of scam or pseudoscience nonsense, we stop immediately." Lucas nodded, accepting the conditions without argument. "That's all I'm asking for. Just a chance to show you and Camille that there might be possibilities that haven't been explored yet." As they made arrangements for the trial session, Brielle found herself wondering what she was getting herself and her daughter into. But looking at Camille's face, seeing the first genuine interest she had shown in anything since the accident, Brielle realized that even a small chance of hope was worth the risk of disappointment. The physical therapy room at St. Catherine's Medical Center had been transformed. Where typically there would be parallel bars, exercise mats, and the standard equipment of conventional rehabilitation, Lucas had arranged something that looked more like a combination of playground and art studio. Colorful mats created comfortable seating areas. Musical instruments were scattered around the space, and what appeared to be easels with large sheets of paper stood ready for use. Dr. Harrison observed from the corner with obvious skepticism, his arms crossed and his expression suggesting he was humoring what he considered to be an elaborate waste of time. Two physical therapists flanked him, equally dubious about this departure from their established protocols. Brielle sat nearby, her laptop closed for once, giving her complete attention to whatever was about to unfold. "Camille," Lucas began, positioning himself at her eye level rather than standing over her wheelchair. "I want to try something different today. Instead of focusing on your legs, I want to focus on you as a complete person. Your legs are just one part of who you are, but they've been getting all the attention lately." Camille looked intrigued despite herself. After weeks of medical professionals discussing her condition in clinical terms, someone was finally talking to her as if she were more than a collection of symptoms and deficits. Jason appeared beside the wheelchair with a large box of colored markers and an encouraging smile. "Want to draw what it feels like inside your body?" he asked with the kind of direct curiosity that only another young person could offer. Not the outside parts that everyone can see, but the feelings and the dreams and the stuff that's still working perfectly. The request was unlike anything in conventional physical therapy, but Camille immediately understood what he meant. She selected a blue marker and began drawing on the large paper, creating swirling patterns that seemed to represent emotions rather than anatomical structures. As she drew, Lucas began asking her questions, not about pain levels or range of motion, but about her dreams, her fears, her memories of what her body used to feel like when she was swimming or running. "Close your eyes," Lucas said gently after she had filled the paper with colors and shapes that somehow captured her internal experience. "I want you to remember the feeling of diving into the pool on a perfect summer day. Not the accident, the good dives, the ones where you felt like you were flying." As Camille closed her eyes and began to describe those sensations, something remarkable began to happen. Her breathing deepened, her shoulders relaxed, and for the first time since the accident, she seemed to inhabit her body rather than simply enduring it. Lucas began working with her hands and arms, but not in the mechanical way of traditional physical therapy. Instead, he guided her through movements that mimicked swimming strokes while she continued to visualize herself moving freely through water. Jason provided a soundtrack, playing soft music on a small keyboard that seemed perfectly synchronized with the rhythm of her imagined swimming. "Now," Lucas said, his voice barely above a whisper, "without opening your eyes, tell me if you can feel any tingling or warmth anywhere in your body." Camille concentrated for a moment, her face showing intense focus. "My back," she said with surprise. It feels warm, like when you sit in the sun after getting out of a cold pool. Dr. Harrison straightened with interest despite his skepticism. Sensation in the back was not something that had appeared in any of the previous examinations. He moved closer, his clinical training overriding his doubt about the unconventional methods. Lucas continued the session for another 45 minutes, guiding Camille through a series of exercises that combined visualization, gentle movement, and emotional exploration. Jason proved to be an integral part of the process, his natural empathy allowing him to sense when Camille was becoming frustrated or discouraged, offering encouragement or distraction at exactly the right moments. By the end of the session, Camille was sitting up straighter and interacting with more animation than Brielle had seen since before the accident. More importantly, she had reported sensations in areas where the medical examinations had indicated complete loss of feeling. "I'd like to run some quick tests," Dr. Harrison said, his professional skepticism warring with his curiosity about what he had observed. The neurological examination that followed revealed subtle but definite responses to stimuli that had previously produced no reaction. "This is unexpected," Dr. Harrison admitted, reviewing his findings. "There appears to be some return of sensation in the lower thoracic region. It's not dramatic, but it's measurable and significant." Brielle felt her heart racing. After weeks of devastating pronouncements about permanent damage and irreversible limitations, they were finally hearing about improvement, about possibilities rather than restrictions. "How is this possible?" she asked, looking between Dr. Harrison and Lucas. "Traditional rehabilitation focuses on the physical pathways," Lucas explained. "But the nervous system is influenced by emotional state, stress levels, hope, fear, all the things that conventional medicine tends to categorize as secondary factors. When someone experiences trauma like Camille's, the entire system shuts down, not just the damaged areas. Sometimes you have to address the whole person before the physical healing can begin." Dr. Harrison nodded slowly, his scientific training making him cautious about accepting explanations that couldn't be easily quantified, but his clinical experience forcing him to acknowledge the results he had just documented. "I'd like to schedule follow-up sessions," he said finally. "Whatever you're doing, it appears to be having a positive effect that we should continue to monitor and document." As they left the hospital that afternoon, Brielle noticed that Camille was asking questions about when they could return, showing the first enthusiasm for any aspect of her treatment since the accident began. The girl who had been passively accepting her limitations was now actively engaged in the possibility of recovery. That evening, Brielle found herself researching Lucas Thompson for the first time since their encounter. What she discovered in medical journals and conference proceedings painted a picture of a brilliant doctor whose innovative approaches had achieved remarkable results before his sudden departure from institutional medicine. The mystery of why such a skilled professional had chosen to work in building maintenance was still unclear, but his credentials and published research were undeniably impressive. More importantly, she had seen with her own eyes the transformation in her daughter. During a single session, for the first time in weeks, Camille had gone to bed talking about tomorrow rather than simply enduring it. The boardroom of Montgomery Industries had witnessed countless high-stakes meetings, but the tension crackling through the air that Tuesday morning was unlike anything Brielle had experienced in her 4 years as CEO. Her head of security, former FBI investigator Robert Kane, stood beside a large display screen showing newspaper clippings, court documents, and medical records that made her blood run cold. "I felt obligated to bring this to your attention immediately," Kane said, his voice carrying the practiced gravity of someone delivering devastating intelligence. Dr. Lucas Thompson was the subject of a major malpractice investigation 3 years ago. The case made national headlines in the medical community. The screen displayed a series of damning newspaper headlines. "Experimental treatment ends in tragedy. Young neurosurgeon's controversial methods under investigation. And medical board reviews dangerous procedures after patient death. Court. Documents showed a wrongful death lawsuit filed against Lucas, alleging that his experimental treatments had directly caused a patient's death. Brielle stared at the evidence, feeling as though someone had pulled the floor out from beneath her. Just days ago, she had been praising Lucas's innovative methods to Dr. Harrison, defending his unconventional approach against the skepticism of traditional medicine. Now she was looking at documentation that suggested she had entrusted her daughter's care to someone whose methods had allegedly killed a patient. Who was the patient? She asked, her voice barely audible above the hum of the conference room's ventilation system. Kane hesitated before answering, clearly aware of how much worse his response would make the situation. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, age 31. She was also his research partner and romantic partner. The medical board investigated allegations that Dr. Thompson used her as an unauthorized test subject for experimental spinal cord procedures. The revelation hit Brielle like a physical blow. The woman Lucas had spoken about with such reverence, whose research he had credited with developing his innovative approaches, had died under his care. The passionate dedication he showed when working with Camille suddenly took on a sinister cast. Was he trying to prove the validity of treatments that had already killed someone he loved? The case was eventually settled out of court, King continued, but the damage to his reputation was irreversible. Multiple colleagues came forward with concerns about his willingness to bypass established protocols and use untested procedures on vulnerable patients. The hospital administration at Mass General quietly forced his resignation, and his medical license was suspended, pending a full investigation. The documents painted a picture that was completely at odds with the caring, competent professional she had come to trust with her daughter's recovery. Headlines spoke of reckless endangerment, of a brilliant doctor whose ego had led him to believe he could succeed where established medicine had failed, regardless of the risk to his patients. "There's more," Kane said, advancing to the next slide. After leaving Boston, Dr. Thompson worked briefly at a rehabilitation center in Portland, Oregon. He was terminated after 6 months following complaints from families who felt he was making unrealistic promises about recovery and encouraging patients to abandon conventional treatments. Brielle felt sick. The pattern that emerged from Kane's investigation suggested a man who, despite his credentials and past success, had become dangerously obsessed with proving theories that the medical establishment had rejected for good reason. The caring professional who had brought hope back into Camille's eyes was apparently someone who had a history of raising false hopes and causing real harm. That evening, Brielle waited until Camille was asleep before confronting Lucas at his small apartment in Jamaica Plain. The modest 2-bedroom space was a stark contrast to the life he must have lived as a successful neurosurgeon. Filled with medical textbooks, research papers, and children's drawings that Jason had apparently made to decorate the walls, she placed Kane's investigation file on the coffee table, between them, watching Lucas's face as recognition dawned, followed by a profound sadness that seemed to age him years in a matter of seconds. "Were you ever going to tell me?" Brielle asked, fighting to keep her voice steady despite the rage and betrayal coursing through her system. Lucas looked at the file, then back at her, his eyes holding the kind of pain that comes from reliving tragedy. "Yes," he said simply. "When I felt you were ready to understand what really happened, not just what the headline suggested. Ready?" Brielle's carefully controlled composure cracked. "You're treating my daughter with experimental methods, and you didn't think I needed to know that your last experimental patient died, that you were investigated for reckless endangerment?" Lucas didn't flinch at her words, though she could see the pain they caused. He reached for a worn photo on the side table, a picture of him with a beautiful dark-haired woman in lab coats, both smiling with the confidence of people who believed they were on the verge of changing the world. "Patricia was dying," he said, softly, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. Aggressive spinal cancer, stage 4, with tumors that conventional surgery couldn't reach without causing complete paralysis. She had maybe 3 months to live, and those months would have been spent in agony. He looked directly into Brielle's eyes, his gaze unwavering despite the accusations. She volunteered for an experimental procedure that we had developed together, based on our research into neuroplasticity and regenerative medicine. It was her idea, her choice, and she knew the risks better than anyone because she had helped design the protocol. Lucas's voice grew steadier as he continued. The procedure initially worked. For 2 weeks, Patricia experienced significant improvement, reduced tumor activity, decreased pain, increased mobility. We thought we had achieved something revolutionary. Then her body began rejecting the treatment. The tumors became more aggressive, and she died within days. But the investigation, Brielle began. The investigation cleared me of any wrongdoing, Lucas interrupted gently. The medical board reviewed every aspect of the procedure and found that Patricia's death was caused by the progression of her disease, not by the treatment. But her family couldn't accept that. They needed someone to blame, and I was the most obvious target. He gestured toward the newspaper clippings in Kane's file. The media loves stories about arrogant doctors playing God with patients' lives. It's a compelling narrative, even when it's not accurate. By the time the official investigation concluded, that I had followed all proper protocols and that Patricia had given full informed consent, the damage to my reputation was irreversible. Despite his explanation, Brielle couldn't fully shake the feeling that something fundamental had been broken in their developing trust. Even if the official investigation had cleared him, the fact remained that his experimental methods had been associated with a patient's death. The risk that she had been unknowingly taking with Camille's life suddenly seemed enormous and terrifying. What about Portland? She pressed. The families who complained about false promises? Lucas's expression grew more pained. After Patricia's death, I became obsessed with proving that our research could help people. I worked with several patients whose cases were similar to hers, and I may have been too aggressive in my optimism about their potential for recovery. When some of them didn't improve as much as I had hoped, their families felt I had misled them about what's possible. The admission confirmed Brielle's worst fears. Lucas was someone whose grief and guilt had driven him to make promises he couldn't keep, to take risks with vulnerable patients that any reasonable medical professional would avoid. The progress Camille had shown might be real, but it was being achieved by someone whose judgment had been compromised by personal tragedy and professional desperation. I think, Brielle said carefully, that we need to step back and reconsider our approach to Camille's treatment. There are other options, more conventional approaches that don't carry these kinds of risks. Lucas nodded slowly, as if he had been expecting this conversation from the moment Kane's investigation began. I understand. You're doing what you think is best for Camille, and I respect that. But I hope you'll remember that the progress she's made is real, regardless of what happened in my past. The resignation in his voice made Brielle question her decision for a moment, but she pushed the doubt away. The safety of her daughter had to come before any other consideration, and Lucas's history suggested that his methods, however innovative, carried risks that she wasn't willing to accept. As she left his apartment that night, Brielle tried to ignore the image of Jason's drawings on the wall, innocent artwork that showed stick figures of people holding hands and smiling, a young boy's vision of a world where everyone took care of each other. The simple optimism of those drawings seemed to mock the complicated realities of adult decisions and the weight of protecting someone you love from potential harm. The Whitmore Institute for Neurological Rehabilitation stood like a monument to medical excellence against the backdrop of the Swiss Alps. Its glass and steel architecture spoke of cutting-edge technology and unlimited resources, while its location in one of the world's most prestigious medical tourism destinations promised the kind of care that only unlimited wealth could provide. Dr. Elizabeth Reimer, the Institute's director, had flown to Boston personally to meet with Briel and present their treatment program. Her credentials were impeccable: Harvard Medical School, residency at Johns Hopkins, fellowship at the Mayo Clinic, and 15 years of experience treating the most challenging spinal cord injuries from around the world. The Whitmore Institute represents the absolute pinnacle of conventional spinal cord rehabilitation, Dr. Reimer explained during their meeting in Briel's penthouse office, her slight German accent lending authority to her words. Our success rates are documented in peer-reviewed journals. Our methods have been validated by decades of clinical research, and our facility is equipped with technology that most hospitals can only dream of. The presentation materials were impressive: statistical analyses showing measurable improvement in over 70% of their patients, testimonials from grateful families whose children had achieved greater functionality than initially predicted, and photographs of state-of-the-art equipment that looked more like something from a space program than a medical facility. Most importantly, Dr. Reimer continued, our approach is completely standardized and evidence-based. Every aspect of treatment follows established protocols that have been proven safe and effective across thousands of cases. There are no experimental procedures, no untested theories, no variables that could put your daughter at risk. The contrast with Lucas's unconventional methods could not have been more stark, where he worked with art supplies and musical instruments. In a converted therapy room, the Whitmore Institute offered robotic exoskeletons and computer-controlled electrical stimulation. Where he relied on emotional connection and intuitive understanding, they provided systematic, quantified rehabilitation. Based on decades of accumulated scientific knowledge, Briel found herself drawn to the certainty that Dr. Reimer offered. After the uncertainty and emotional turmoil of the past weeks, the idea of placing Camille's care in the hands of an institution with documented success rates and unquestionable credentials was enormously appealing. There would be no wondering about hidden histories, no concern about experimental procedures that might cause more harm than good. The program requires a minimum commitment of 3 months, Dr. Reimer explained. Patients live in our residential facility, which provides not just medical care but educational and social programs designed to help young people adapt to their new circumstances while maximizing their potential for recovery. When Lucas learned of Briel's decision to transfer Camille to Switzerland, his professional demeanor cracked for the first time since she had known him. They met in the hospital corridor outside Camille's room, where she was having what was supposed to be her final session with the traditional physical therapy team. You're making a mistake, Lucas said, his voice low and urgent. Camille is responding to our treatment approach. The neural pathways we've been working to establish are fragile. If you interrupt the process now, those connections may not reform in the same way. His eyes held an intensity that reminded Briel uncomfortably of the obsessive determination that had apparently driven him to take dangerous risks in the past. The Whitmore Institute follows protocols that were developed for adults with different types of injuries. They'll treat Camille's symptoms, but they won't address the underlying trauma response that's preventing her nervous system from fully healing. Briel stood firm, armored in the certainty that came from choosing the safe, conventional path. Dr. Reimer has successfully treated hundreds of pediatric spinal injuries. Their methods are proven, their facility is world-class, and their approach doesn't depend on the vision of a single practitioner. What she didn't say was that their approach was also safer, more predictable, and free from the emotional complications that had made Lucas's treatment both effective and troubling. At the Whitmore Institute, Camille would receive the best possible care without Briel having to worry about whether her daughter was being used to validate someone's desperate need for professional redemption. Lucas seemed about to argue further, then stopped himself, nodding slowly as though coming to terms with a difficult truth. I understand. You're protecting your daughter the only way you know how, and I can't fault you for that." The resignation in his voice made Brielle question her decision for a moment, but she pushed the doubt away. The Whitmore Institute represented everything that Lucas's approach wasn't: institutional, methodical, accountable, and safe. When it came time to explain the decision to Camille, Brielle had prepared a careful explanation about the wonderful opportunity to work with the world's best specialists in a beautiful location where she would meet other young people facing similar challenges. She had expected resistance, perhaps tears, but she was unprepared for her daughter's complete emotional shutdown. Camille listened to the description of the Swiss clinic with the same passive compliance she had shown during the darkest days after her accident. The spark of engagement that had returned during her sessions with Lucas and Jason disappeared, replaced by a resigned acceptance that was somehow more heartbreaking than tears would have been. "I don't want to go," Camille said finally, her voice small but determined. "Lucas and Jason understand what I need. The other doctors just see my legs, but they see me." The simple statement cut through all of Brielle's carefully constructed rationalizations. Her daughter wasn't asking for the most advanced medical facility or the most prestigious credentials. She was asking for the people who had made her feel hope again after weeks of despair. "Sweetheart," Brielle said, kneeling beside Camille's wheelchair, "the doctors in Switzerland have special equipment that can help your spinal cord heal. They've helped hundreds of young people learn to walk again." Camille's response was devastatingly direct. "But Lucas already helped me feel things in my back. And Jason makes me laugh. Why do we have to leave the people who are making me better to go find people who might make me better?" The childish logic carried an undeniable truth that made Brielle's decision suddenly seem cold and clinical. Her daughter wasn't a medical case to be transferred to the facility with the best statistical outcomes. She was a 9-year-old girl who had formed healing connections with people who understood her, not just as a patient, but as a complete person. The day before their scheduled departure for Switzerland, Lucas and Jason came to say goodbye. Lucas brought with him a folder containing detailed notes about Camille's progress, her responses to different approaches, and his recommendations for continuing the emotional and psychological aspects of her rehabilitation. "The physical improvements are just the beginning," he told Dr. Reamer during a brief consultation. "Camille's real healing is happening in her relationship with her own body, her willingness to hope again. The Whitmore Institute's protocols are excellent for addressing the mechanical aspects of spinal injury, but don't forget that she's also recovering from trauma that goes deeper than physical damage." Jason's goodbye was more direct. He presented Camille with a small journal decorated with drawings of stick figures swimming, dancing, and flying. "You can write to me about all the new things you learn," he said seriously. "And when you come back, you can teach me everything the Swiss doctors showed you. The assumption that she would return, that this was a temporary separation rather than a permanent transfer to different care, made Camille smile for the first time since learning about the trip. But it also made Brielle realize how final this decision felt, and how uncertain she was that it was the right choice. As they prepared to leave for the airport, Camille sat quietly in her wheelchair, clutching Jason's journal and staring out the window of their penthouse as if trying to memorize the view of Boston Harbor. Her acceptance of the situation was complete, but it lacked any enthusiasm or hope, exactly the opposite of what Brielle had been trying to achieve by choosing the safest possible treatment option. The private terminal at Logan International Airport was designed for discretion and efficiency, allowing wealthy clients to avoid the chaos of commercial travel while maintaining complete privacy. Brielle had used these facilities dozens of times for business trips, but today the luxurious lounge felt more like a waiting room for the condemned. Camille sat motionless in her wheelchair, staring at the journal Jason had given her without opening it. The medical transport team moved efficiently around them, checking equipment and coordinating with the Swiss medical personnel who would meet their flight in Zurich. Everything was proceeding according to plan, yet Brielle felt a growing sense of dread that had nothing to do with concerns about international travel. "Mrs. Montgomery?" The gate agent approached with a small package that had just been delivered. This arrived from Miss Camille, with instructions that it be given to her before departure. Inside the package was a recording device, an old-fashioned cassette player that looked like it had been borrowed from a museum. Attached was a note in Jason's careful elementary school handwriting. "Play this when you feel scared. It's magic music that remembers everything good about you." Camille looked at the device with the first spark of interest she had shown all morning. When she pressed play, the speakers filled with a melody that was instantly recognizable. It was the music Jason had played during her therapy sessions, but layered underneath, it was something even more precious. Her own voice, humming along with the tune during one of their sessions, mixed with the sound of her laughter when she had first felt sensation returning to her back. The recording was imperfect, clearly made on improvised equipment, but it captured something that no professional documentation could convey: the sound of a young girl rediscovering joy after trauma, the music of healing happening in real time. It was raw, authentic, and undeniably beautiful. Also in the package was an envelope, addressed to Brielle in Lucas's precise handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a quote that made her breath catch. "Your father once told me that the greatest medical breakthroughs don't come from perfect technology. They come from perfect understanding of what each patient needs. To heal, Camille needs more than the best treatment. She needs the right treatment. Trust yourself to know the difference." Brielle stared at the note, her mind racing. Lucas had never met her father, and yet somehow the sentiment captured exactly the kind of thing William Montgomery would have said. Her father had built Montgomery Industries not by following conventional wisdom, but by recognizing opportunities that others missed, by trusting his instincts even when they led him away from the safe choices. Sitting in the departure lounge, surrounded by the trappings of wealth and privilege, Brielle found herself remembering a conversation with her father from years ago, when she was still questioning whether she should join the family business. The most successful leaders, he had told her, aren't the ones who make the safest choices. They're the ones who make the right choices, even when those choices look risky to everyone else. She looked at her daughter, who was now listening to the recording with tears streaming down her face, not tears of sadness, but tears of recognition, of connection to something authentic and meaningful that she was about to leave behind. "Mom," Camille said softly, pulling the headphones from her ears, "this is what it sounds like when I'm getting better. Not the machines or the tests, but this, when I remember that I'm still me inside, even if my legs don't work yet." The word "yet" hit Brielle like lightning. For the first time since the accident, Camille was speaking about her condition as temporary, as something that could change. The Swiss clinic, with all its advanced technology and proven protocols, offered adaptation and management. Lucas offered something more dangerous but more precious, the possibility of genuine healing. "Do you really believe Lucas can help you walk again?" Brielle asked, studying her daughter's face carefully. Camille considered the question with the kind of serious thought that 9-year-olds reserve for the most important decisions. "I don't know if I'll walk exactly like before," she said finally. "But when I'm with Lucas and Jason, I feel like my body belongs to me again. Like it's not just broken, but maybe it's just different, and different can still be good." The simple wisdom in her daughter's words cut through all the expert opinions and statistical analyses that had been guiding Brielle's decision-making. Camille wasn't asking for guarantees about walking. She was asking for the chance to feel whole again, to work with people who saw her potential rather than just her limitations. With hands that trembled slightly, Brielle took out her phone. "Made the call that would change everything, Lucas?" she said when he answered, her voice barely steady. "Don't make any plans for the next few months. We're not going to Switzerland." The relief in his voice was immediate and profound. "Are you sure?" The Whitmore Institute really does offer excellent care. They offer excellent conventional care. Brielle interrupted. But Camille doesn't need conventional. She needs you and Jason and whatever magic you two do that makes her believe in herself again. 20 minutes later, Lucas and Jason arrived at the airport, both slightly out of breath from rushing through Boston traffic. When Camille saw them, her face lit up with the kind of pure joy that no amount of medical technology could produce. "We're staying?" she asked, hardly daring to believe it. "We're staying," Brielle confirmed. "And we're going to do whatever it takes to help you heal, even if it means doing things differently than everyone else thinks we should." As they left the airport together, Brielle pushing Camille's wheelchair while Lucas carried the bags and Jason chattered excitedly about all the new things they could try in their next sessions. Brielle realized that for the first time since the accident, she felt genuinely hopeful about the future. The decision to trust Lucas wasn't based on statistical analyses or institutional credentials. It was based on something much simpler and much more powerful: the evidence of her own eyes, the sound of her daughter's laughter, and the recognition that sometimes the most important healing happens not in the most advanced facilities, but in the spaces where people dare to believe in possibilities that conventional wisdom says don't exist. The executive conference room on the 42nd floor of Montgomery Industries had been transformed into something that would have been unrecognizable to the board members who typically conducted business there. The mahogany table that usually held quarterly reports and strategic planning documents now supported an array of medical equipment, research journals, and children's art supplies. The floor-to-ceiling windows that normally framed discussions about market share and profit margins now provided natural light for what had become the most important collaboration of Brielle's life. "Show me everything," Brielle had said to Lucas on their first morning back from the airport. "Every piece of research, every technique you developed with Dr. Hernandez, every insight you've gained from working with patients like Camille. I want to understand not just what you're doing, but why it works." The decision to fully commit to Lucas's approach had required more than just emotional courage. It had demanded a complete restructuring of how Brielle thought about healing, about risk, and about the intersection of business principles with medical innovation. She had spent her entire career making decisions based on quantifiable data and predictable outcomes. But supporting Lucas's work meant embracing uncertainty in service of something that conventional wisdom said was impossible. Lucas had initially hesitated to involve her so directly in the medical aspects of Camille's treatment. "You don't need to understand the technical details," he had said. "Trust is enough." But Brielle had built Montgomery Industries by refusing to delegate understanding to others, by mastering every aspect of the business that bore her family's name. "Trust isn't enough," she had replied firmly. "If I'm going to bet my daughter's future on your methods, I need to understand exactly what we're doing and why." The first week of their partnership had been intensive education for Brielle. Lucas had walked her through Dr. Hernandez's original research on neuroplasticity and emotional healing, explaining how trauma to the spinal cord affected not just physical function, but the entire nervous system's relationship to hope, fear, and self-perception. The science was complex, but the underlying principle was elegantly simple. The body's ability to heal was directly connected to the mind's willingness to believe healing was possible. Traditional rehabilitation focuses on working around damage, Lucas explained, using anatomical diagrams to illustrate his points. The assumption is that destroyed neural pathways are gone forever, so treatment concentrates on training other parts of the nervous system to compensate. It's effective for achieving basic functionality, but it accepts limitation as the starting point. He pulled up brain scans from some of his previous successful cases, pointing to areas where new neural pathways had formed in response to his combined approach of physical therapy, emotional healing, and what he called hope activation. Dr. Hernandez theorized that the nervous system is far more adaptable than we assume. but only when the patient genuinely believes that adaptation is possible. Fear, depression, and resignation actually prevent neuroplasticity. They cause the brain to shut down healing processes that might otherwise occur naturally. Brielle studied the scans, her analytical mind working to understand the implications. So you're saying that Camille's emotional state isn't just important for her psychological well-being, it's actually affecting whether her spinal cord can physically repair itself. Exactly. Which is why Jason's role in her treatment isn't just supportive, it's medically necessary. When Camille sees another young person who believes completely in her potential for recovery, it changes her brain chemistry in ways that make physical healing more likely. The revelation transformed how Brielle understood everything they had been doing. Lucas's seemingly unorthodox methods weren't alternatives to proper medical treatment. They were addressing aspects of the healing process that conventional medicine didn't recognize as medically relevant. As their collaboration deepened, Brielle began contributing insights from her business experience that enhanced Lucas's medical approach. Her expertise in project management and resource optimization helped them develop more systematic ways of tracking Camille's progress, while her understanding of psychology and motivation from years of managing teams provided new strategies for maintaining Camille's engagement during difficult phases of treatment. You're thinking about this like you would any other project, Lucas observed one afternoon as Brielle presented a detailed chart tracking the correlation between Camille's emotional state, her physical responses, and external factors like weather, sleep quality, and social interactions. Because it is a project, Brielle replied. The most important project of my life. And like any successful project, it needs clear objectives, measurable milestones, and systematic problem solving when we encounter obstacles. The systematic approach that Brielle brought to Lucas's intuitive methods created a synergy that neither could have achieved alone. Lucas understood the complex medical and emotional factors that influenced healing, while Brielle provided the organizational framework that allowed them to optimize those factors consistently rather than relying on sporadic inspiration. Their working relationship gradually extended beyond Camille's treatment. Lucas found himself consulting with Brielle about other cases. He was handling informally families who had reached out to him after hearing about Camille's progress. Brielle, meanwhile, discovered that the skills she had developed as a CEO translated surprisingly well to medical project management, and she began researching ways that Montgomery Industries might contribute to advancing the kind of integrated treatment approach that Lucas represented. Have you ever thought about formalizing your methods? She asked during one of their evening strategy sessions. Developing protocols that other practitioners could learn and implement? Lucas looked surprised by the suggestion. The medical establishment isn't interested in approaches that can't be standardized and replicated in clinical trials. What works for Camille might not work for another patient with a similar injury. Too much depends on individual psychology, family dynamics, social support systems. So you develop multiple protocols for different patient profiles. Brielle replied, her mind automatically shifting into business development mode. You create diagnostic criteria for identifying which patients are likely to benefit from emotional integration. Therapy. You establish training programs for practitioners. You document case studies that demonstrate effectiveness. She began sketching organizational charts and implementation timelines, her excitement building as she recognized the potential for scaling Lucas's approach beyond individual cases. What you and Dr. Hernandez developed isn't just a treatment method, it's a completely different philosophy of healing. But philosophy without infrastructure remains theoretical. Lucas watched her work, seeing his scattered insights and intuitive methods being transformed into something that could genuinely change how spinal injury rehabilitation was practiced. For the first time since Patricia's death, he began to envision a future where their research could reach beyond the individual patients he was able to help personally. The breakthrough they had all been working toward came on a Tuesday morning in October, 6 weeks after their return from the airport. Camille had been showing steady progress in her sensation and motor control, but the improvements had been incremental, encouraging, but not dramatic, enough to suggest the kind of recovery that would allow her to walk independently. That morning's session had begun routinely, with Lucas guiding Camille through the combination of visualization, gentle movement, and emotional expression that had become their standard approach. Jason was providing musical accompaniment on his keyboard, and Brielle was taking her usual detailed notes about Camille's responses and progress indicators. "Close your eyes and imagine you're back at the pool before the accident," Lucas said, his voice taking on the gentle, hypnotic quality that helped Camille achieve the deeply relaxed state where her best progress typically occurred. "Remember the feeling of standing at the edge of the diving board, knowing you're about to do something that feels like flying." Camille's breathing deepened and her face relaxed into the peaceful expression that indicated she was fully engaged. With the visualization, Lucas began working with her legs, providing gentle resistance, as she attempted to activate muscle groups that had been unresponsive since the accident. "Now, instead of diving into the water, imagine diving into light," Lucas continued. "Warm golden light that heals everything it touches. Feel that light flowing through your spine, reconnecting pathways that have been waiting to communicate again." For several minutes, the session proceeded normally, with Camille showing the usual small responses to stimulation and guided movement. Then something shifted. Her eyes snapped open with an expression of wonder and disbelief. "Lucas," she whispered, her voice filled with awe, "something's different. It feels like electricity is moving through my back, but good electricity." Lucas maintained his professional composure, but Brielle could see the excitement in his eyes. "Can you describe exactly where you're feeling that sensation?" "All the way from my shoulders down to..." Camille paused, concentrating intensely, "down to my hips. It's warm and tingly, like when your foot falls asleep, but it doesn't hurt." Lucas exchanged a significant look with Brielle. Sensation extending from the shoulders to the hips suggested neural activity far beyond what any of the previous tests had indicated was possible. "Camille, I want you to try something for me," Lucas said, his voice carefully neutral despite the momentous nature of what was happening. "Don't think about your legs as separate from the rest of your body. Think about your whole self as one connected system, and imagine that electricity you're feeling flowing all the way down to your toes." Camille closed her eyes again, her face showing intense concentration. For several long moments, nothing visible happened. Then, so subtly that Brielle almost missed it, Camille's right foot moved. Not just a twitch or a reflexive response, but a deliberate flexing motion that clearly indicated conscious control. "Did you see that?" Camille asked excitedly, opening her eyes and looking down at her feet. "I made it move. I really made it move." Lucas carefully conducted a series of neurological tests, documenting responses that were far beyond anything they had recorded before. Camille was able to produce small but unmistakable movements in both feet, and showed restored sensation throughout her lower extremities. Most remarkably, the movements appeared to be getting stronger as she practiced, suggesting that the neural pathways were not just reconnecting, but actively strengthening. "This is extraordinary," Lucas said quietly, his professional amazement overriding his usual calm demeanor. "The level of recovery we're seeing typically takes months or even years to develop, if it occurs at all." Brielle found herself unable to speak, watching her daughter wiggle her toes with the kind of fierce concentration that other children might apply to video games. The moment felt surreal after weeks of incremental progress measured in tiny improvements. They were witnessing what could only be described as a medical miracle, but the most remarkable aspect of the breakthrough wasn't the physical recovery itself, it was Camille's response to it. Instead of the explosive joy that Brielle had expected, her daughter showed a calm satisfaction, as if this development was exactly what she had been expecting all along. "I knew this would happen," Camille said matter-of-factly. "My legs were just taking a break while the rest of me figured out how to be brave again." The simple statement encapsulated everything that Lucas had been trying to explain about the connection between emotional and physical healing. Camille's recovery wasn't just about damaged neural pathways learning to function again. It was about a young girl rediscovering the fundamental belief that her body could be trusted, that healing was possible, that the future could be different from the past. Over the next several days, Camille's motor function continued to improve at a rate that astonished everyone involved in her care. Dr. Harrison, who had initially been skeptical of Lucas's methods, found himself documenting recovery patterns that challenged everything he thought he knew about spinal cord injury rehabilitation. "I've never seen anything like this," he admitted during a consultation to review Camille's latest test results. "The speed and extent of neurological recovery is unprecedented in my experience. Whatever you two are doing, it's working in ways that conventional medicine can't fully explain." The success with Camille began attracting attention from other families facing similar challenges. Word spread through Boston's medical community about the CEO's daughter who was walking again, after being told she never would, and about the unconventional collaboration between a former neurosurgeon and a business executive that had made it possible. Lucas found himself fielding calls from desperate parents, while Brielle was approached by medical researchers interested in studying their integrated approach. The personal healing journey that had begun with a chance encounter in a hospital corridor was evolving into something with implications far beyond their individual circumstances. "We need to be careful about how we handle this attention," Brielle warned during one of their planning sessions. "Success can be as dangerous as failure if it's not managed properly." But even as they navigated the growing interest in their work, both Brielle and Lucas understood that something fundamental had shifted between them that went beyond their collaboration around Camille's treatment. The intense partnership that had developed through shared commitment to Camille's healing had created a connection that neither had anticipated. Working together 16-hour days, sharing the emotional highs and lows of Camille's recovery, and witnessing each other's dedication to something larger than personal interest, had built a foundation of trust and respect that felt increasingly like something more profound. The evening after, Camille took her first independent steps, tentative, supported by a walking frame, but undeniably real. Brielle and Lucas found themselves alone in the conference room that had become their shared workspace, surrounded by the evidence of their successful collaboration. "We did it," Brielle said quietly, still hardly able to believe what they had accomplished. "You did it," Lucas corrected. "By trusting something that every rational analysis told you to reject." "No," Brielle replied, looking directly at him. "We did it, together, and I think we're just getting started." The words carried implications that extended far beyond Camille's recovery, acknowledging a partnership that had transformed both their lives in ways that neither had expected when they first met in that hospital corridor months ago. The autumn sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the newly constructed Hernandez Montgomery Center for Integrated Healing, casting long shadows across the reception area where families from across the country waited with expressions that Brielle recognized all too well: the desperate hope of parents who had been told their situation was hopeless. 1 year after that pivotal moment in St. Catherine's Medical Center, the simple encounter between a CEO and a maintenance worker had evolved into something neither could have imagined. The center, named to honor both Dr. Patricia Hernandez's groundbreaking research and the Montgomery family's commitment to transformative medicine, occupied a purpose-built facility in Cambridge, just minutes from Harvard Medical School and Massachusetts General Hospital. The building itself embodied the integrated approach that Lucas and Brielle had developed: medical-grade equipment seamlessly integrated with spaces designed for art, music, and a kind of emotional healing that conventional rehabilitation centers rarely considered medically relevant. "Mrs. Thompson will see you now," The receptionist announced to a nervous-looking couple whose 8-year-old son had been paralyzed in a skiing accident 3 months earlier. They followed a path that hundreds of families had taken before them, walking past walls decorated with photos and letters from former patients, young people who had defied medical predictions and reclaimed possibilities that traditional medicine had written off as impossible. In the main treatment area, Lucas worked with a 12-year-old girl named Sarah, whose horse riding accident had left her with injuries remarkably similar to Camille's original diagnosis. Beside him, Jason, now 8 years old and officially enrolled in the center's peer mentor training program, guided Sarah through the kind of visualization exercises that had proven so effective with other young patients. The transformation in Lucas was remarkable. Gone was the quiet resignation of the maintenance worker who had approached Brielle in that hospital corridor. In its place was the confident authority of a medical professional who had not only reclaimed his reputation but had established himself as a pioneer in a field that was rapidly gaining recognition throughout the medical community. His methods, once dismissed as unscientific, were now the subject of peer-reviewed research studies and international conferences. The key is understanding that healing happens on multiple levels simultaneously, Lucas explained to Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a visiting researcher from the University of California, San Francisco, who was documenting their treatment protocols for potential replication on the West Coast. Physical rehabilitation without emotional integration addresses only part of the problem. We found that patients who engage with both aspects of treatment show recovery rates that are significantly higher than conventional approaches alone. The statistics supported his claims. In the 12 months since the center had opened, they had treated 63 patients with various forms of spinal trauma. 57 had shown measurable improvement beyond their original prognosis, with 31 achieving functional recovery that their original medical teams had deemed impossible. The success rates had attracted attention not just from desperate families, but from medical insurance companies, research institutions, and government agencies interested in understanding how integrated treatment approaches might revolutionize rehabilitation medicine. But the most compelling evidence of their success walked through the center every day as a volunteer, mentor, and living testament to the power of believing in possibilities that conventional wisdom rejected. Camille, now 10 years old and fully mobile, had not only regained the ability to walk, but had returned to swimming with a passion that surpassed even her pre-accident enthusiasm. Her story had been featured in medical journals, national magazines, and a documentary film that was currently being considered for several major awards. More importantly, Camille had become the center's most effective ambassador, her mere presence providing hope to newly arrived families who were struggling to believe that recovery was possible. She had an intuitive understanding of what other young patients needed to hear, and her matter-of-fact confidence about healing had proven more persuasive than any medical literature or statistical analysis. "I know it's scary," she was telling Sarah's parents during a family orientation session, "but Lucas and Jason aren't just doctors, they're like possibility experts. They helped me remember that my body belonged to me, even when it felt broken." The center had also become a hub for training medical professionals who wanted to integrate emotional healing approaches into their own practices. Lucas had developed a comprehensive certification program that attracted doctors, nurses, physical therapists, and social workers from around the world. The waiting list for the 6-month intensive training program extended more than 2 years into the future. "We're not trying to replace conventional medicine," Lucas explained during one of his regular lectures to visiting professionals. "We're trying to complete it. The human body is remarkably resilient, but that resilience can only be fully accessed when the patient genuinely believes in their potential for recovery. Our job is to create the conditions where that belief becomes not just possible, but inevitable." The success of the center had also transformed Brielle's role within Montgomery Industries. While she remained CEO, she had restructured the company's operations to allow for significant involvement in medical technology and rehabilitation research. Montgomery Industries had become the primary funding source for the center's operations, and Briel had established a foundation that provided grants to other researchers working on integrated approaches to complex medical challenges. The professional partnership between Briel and Lucas had evolved into something deeper and more personal over the months of working together. Their shared commitment to helping families facing impossible circumstances had created a bond that transcended their original doctor-patient relationship, growing into mutual respect, intellectual collaboration, and eventually, genuine love. Their engagement had been announced 6 months earlier at the center's first annual gala, an event that had raised over $3 million for expanded research and treatment programs. The announcement had surprised no one who had witnessed their partnership, but it had generated significant media attention as a story of two people whose lives had been transformed by their commitment to healing others. People ask us how a CEO and a former neurosurgeon ended up running a rehabilitation center together, Briel had said during her speech at the engagement announcement. The answer is simple. We both learned that the most important breakthroughs happen when you're brave enough to trust what conventional wisdom says is impossible. The wedding was scheduled for the following spring in the center's gardens, with Camille serving as maid of honor and Jason as best man. The ceremony would be officiated by Dr. Harrison, who had become not just a medical colleague, but a close family friend. Impressed by the way Lucas and Briel had transformed his understanding of what healing could look like, as the anniversary of their first meeting approached, Briel found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had begun with Lucas's simple offer to help. The transformation went far beyond Camille's physical recovery or even the success of the treatment center. It was about the discovery that some of the most profound changes in life begin when someone is brave enough to say, "Trust me," and someone else is wise enough to take that leap of faith. The anniversary celebration was held in the same conference room at Montgomery Industries where Lucas and Briel had first begun their intensive collaboration. The space had been decorated with artwork created by patients from the center, photographs documenting recovery journeys, and letters from families whose lives had been changed by their work. Dr. Walsh, who had spent the past month documenting their methods, presented her preliminary research findings to the assembled group of medical professionals, patients, families, and supporters. What we're seeing at the Hernandez Montgomery Center challenges fundamental assumptions about neuroplasticity and recovery from traumatic injury, she announced. The integration of emotional healing with traditional rehabilitation appears to activate neural repair mechanisms that conventional approaches don't access. We're not just looking at improved outcomes. We're looking at a completely different understanding of what recovery means. The presentation included video testimonials from patients and families, statistical analyses comparing their success rates to conventional treatment programs, and brain imaging studies that showed neural pathway development in patients who had been told such recovery was neurologically impossible. But the most powerful moment came when Lucas was invited to address the audience. He stood before a room full of people whose lives had been touched by their work, former patients, who were now mentoring new arrivals, families who had found hope where none had existed before, medical professionals who had expanded their understanding of what healing could look like. 1 year ago, Lucas began, his voice steady and confident. I was working as a maintenance worker in a hospital, helping with problems that could be fixed with tools and elbow grease. I thought that chapter of my life where I could make a real difference in people's healing had ended with tragedy and professional disgrace. He gestured toward Camille, who was sitting in the front row beside Briel, both of them beaming with pride. Then I met a little girl who couldn't walk and a mother who was desperate enough to trust a stranger in work clothes who made an impossible promise. That trust changed everything, not just for Camille, not just for her family, but for everyone. In this room and everyone who will walk through our doors in the future." Lucas paused, his eyes finding Brielle's across the room. "The most important lesson I've learned is that healing rarely happens the way we expect it to. Sometimes the person who needs to be healed isn't the patient, sometimes it's the doctor, or the mother, or the support system around them. Sometimes helping one person walk again teaches you how to help dozens of others believe in possibilities they never knew existed." The applause was sustained and heartfelt, but Lucas held up his hand to continue. "I want to read something that Camille wrote for her school assignment last month about a person who changed your life," he said, pulling out a folded piece of paper. "She didn't write about me or her mother or any of the doctors who helped her. She wrote about Jason." He unfolded the paper and read, "Jason changed my life because he never acted like I was broken. When all the grown-ups were worried about my legs, Jason just wanted to play music and draw pictures and be friends. He taught me that the most important part of getting better isn't fixing what's wrong, it's remembering what's right. Now I help other kids remember what's right about them too, just like Jason taught me." The room fell silent as the profound wisdom of a 10-year-old's perspective settled over the audience. In a few simple sentences, Camille had articulated something that medical textbooks struggled to explain, that healing often begins not with addressing deficits, but with recognizing and nurturing the wholeness, that trauma cannot destroy As the formal program concluded and people began moving toward the reception area, Brielle found herself standing alone with Lucas in the corner of the room, both of them overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had grown from their initial leap of faith. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" she asked quietly. Lucas smiled, his mind traveling back to that moment in the hospital corridor, when he had approached a desperate mother and her paralyzed daughter with nothing but conviction and compassion. "I said, trust me," he replied. "You said, I think I can help your daughter walk again," Brielle corrected gently. "But what you really gave us was something much more valuable than the ability to walk. You gave us back the ability to hope." Looking around the room at the families, patients, and medical professionals whose lives had been touched by their work, Brielle realized that the transformation that began with Lucas's simple offer had rippled far beyond anything they could have imagined. Children who had been told they would never walk were not just walking, they were running, swimming, dancing, and most importantly, believing in their own limitless potential. Medical professionals who had been trained to focus on limitations were discovering new ways to nurture possibility. Families who had been preparing for lives defined by disability were instead celebrating achievements that conventional medicine had said were impossible. The center now had a waiting list of over 400 families and had begun training programs in 12 other cities across the United States and Canada. International delegations were requesting consultations about establishing similar programs in their own countries. What had begun as one man's desperate desire to help a paralyzed girl had become a movement that was transforming how the medical community understood the relationship between hope and healing. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Camille and Jason were found in the center's music room, playing a piano duet they had composed together, a melody that somehow captured the journey from despair to hope, from isolation to connection, from brokenness to wholeness. "It's funny," Camille said to Jason as they finished their song. "A year ago, I thought the worst thing that could happen to me was not being able to walk. Now I know that the worst thing that could happen would be not helping other people believe they can walk too." Jason nodded seriously, his 8-year-old wisdom reflecting the profound experiences he had witnessed. "My dad says that sometimes the best thing about getting better is getting to help other people get better too. It's like passing on the magic." Listening from the doorway, Brielle and Lucas exchanged a look of wonder and gratitude. The transformation that had begun with trauma and seeming tragedy had evolved into something that was multiplying hope and healing throughout the world. Some stories end with dramatic declarations, or life-changing moments, but the most profound. Transformations happen in the quiet spaces between grand gestures, in a maintenance worker's willingness to approach a desperate family, in a CEO's courage to trust unconventional wisdom, in a young girl's determination to believe that broken things can become whole again, and in two people's discovery that healing others can heal themselves in ways they never expected. Hernandez Montgomery Center stands today as a testament to the power of believing in possibilities that conventional wisdom rejects. Every day, families arrive carrying the weight of impossible diagnoses and leave carrying the lightness of renewed hope. Every day, young people who have been told what they cannot do discover what they can achieve when someone believes in their potential for healing. And every day, the simple truth that Lucas offered in that hospital corridor continues to ripple outward. Sometimes the most profound healing begins with the courage to say, "Trust me," and the wisdom to take that leap of faith. In the end, Camille did more than walk again. She learned to fly, carrying others with her into a future where the impossible becomes not just possible, but inevitable. One family at a time, the morning sun cast long shadows across Harvard Medical School's prestigious Longwood campus as Dr. Camille Montgomery Thompson adjusted her white coat and checked her reflection one final time before entering the lecture hall. At 20 years old, she was the youngest person ever invited to deliver the keynote address at the International Conference on Integrative Neurological Rehabilitation, a field that hadn't even existed when she was 10 years old and learning to walk again in a makeshift treatment room. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was speaking in the same medical complex where, a decade earlier, specialists had told her mother that she would never walk again. Today, she would address over 800 medical professionals from 43 countries about revolutionary treatment approaches that were now being implemented in rehabilitation centers across 6 continents. Ladies and gentlemen, the conference moderator announced, "Please welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Camille Montgomery Thompson, Director of Pediatric Services at the Global Institute for Integrative Healing and founder of the Young Healers Network." The standing ovation that greeted Camille as she approached the podium was thunderous, but not just because of her professional accomplishments. Everyone in that room knew her story, the paralyzed girl whose recovery had sparked a medical revolution that had transformed the lives of thousands of patients worldwide. 10 years ago, Camille began, her voice carrying the same quiet confidence that had once characterized Lucas's approach to seemingly impossible challenges. "I couldn't move my legs. Today, I ran 5 miles before breakfast and then performed microsurgery on experimental neural interface." The journey between those two realities contains everything you need to know about the power of believing in possibilities that conventional wisdom says don't exist. The audience leaned forward, captivated by the young woman whose very presence embodied the transformation she was describing. Camille had inherited her mother's commanding presence and her stepfather's intuitive understanding of human potential, but she had developed her own unique approach to medical practice that integrated the best of both influences. "But I'm not here to talk about my recovery," she continued. "I'm here to talk about the 14,000 patients who have walked through the doors of our affiliated centers worldwide over the past decade, and the 11,200 of them who achieved functional recovery beyond their original prognosis." The statistics were staggering. What had begun as an unconventional collaboration between a desperate CEO and a discredited neurosurgeon had evolved into a global network of treatment centers that had fundamentally altered how the medical community approached neurological rehabilitation. The Hernandez Montgomery methodology, as it was now known in medical literature, had been validated through multiple peer-reviewed studies and was taught in medical schools throughout North America and Europe. Insurance companies had initially resisted covering the integrated treatments, but the superior outcomes and reduced long-term care costs had eventually made resistance economically unsustainable. The question I'm asked most frequently, Camille, Continued, is whether my family's approach represents a departure from evidence-based medicine or an evolution of it. The answer is both and neither. We didn't abandon scientific rigor, we expanded our definition of what constitutes medically relevant evidence. In the audience, Dr. Harrison sat with obvious pride, remembering the skeptical neurologist he had been when first encountering Lucas's unconventional methods. Now retired from active practice, he served on the advisory board of 7 international rehabilitation centers and had co-authored 3 textbooks on integrative neurological therapy. Beside him sat Dr. Elizabeth Reamer, the former director of the prestigious Swiss clinic, who had initially represented everything that Lucas's approach wasn't. Her own transformation had begun 3 years earlier, when she had observed firsthand the superior outcomes being achieved at the Montgomery Thompson centers. She had subsequently restructured her entire Swiss operation around integrative principles, and now served as European Director for the Global Institute. The most important lesson I've learned, Camille continued, both as a patient and now as a practitioner, is that healing is fundamentally about relationship, the relationship between mind and body, between patient and practitioner, between individual recovery and community support, between what seems possible and what actually becomes possible when we have the courage to try. The presentation that followed was a masterpiece of medical communication, weaving together case studies, research data, and philosophical insights in a way that challenged assumptions while providing practical guidance for implementation. Camille had inherited her mother's analytical intelligence and her stepfather's intuitive understanding of complex systems, but she had developed her own synthesis that was somehow greater than the sum of its influences. She concluded by introducing a video message from the Global Institute's main campus in Boston, where Lucas and Brielle were simultaneously addressing their own International Conference on Medical Innovation and Business Ethics. Our work began with one simple truth, Lucas said in the recorded message, his hair now showing gray at the temples, but his eyes still holding the same quiet intensity that had convinced a desperate mother to trust a maintenance worker. Healing happens not just in the physical realm, but in the spaces between people where hope is shared and possibilities are born. Beside him, Brielle, now Dr. Brielle Montgomery Thompson, after completing her own medical degree through an accelerated program designed for experienced healthcare administrators, nodded in agreement. What we've learned over the past decade is that the most profound medical breakthroughs don't necessarily come from new technology or pharmaceutical advances. They come from new ways of understanding the relationship between human potential and human belief. Their marriage 7 years earlier had been celebrated not just as a personal union, but as a symbolic merger of business, innovation with medical intuition. Their partnership had produced not just professional success, but a family that embodied their integrated approach to life. Their 5-year-old twins, Patricia and William, named for the research pioneer who had inspired their work and the grandfather who had built the foundation for their success, were already showing signs of inheriting their parents' unique combination of analytical intelligence and empathetic wisdom. But the most remarkable member of their extended family was Jason, now 18 and beginning his freshman year at Harvard Medical School with a full scholarship funded by the Montgomery Thompson Foundation. The boy who had once helped heal patients through simple friendship and musical intuition was now developing into a medical professional whose understanding of the emotional dimensions of healing had been shaped by a childhood spent witnessing medical miracles. The question people ask me most often, Jason had said during his own recent TED Talk about peer support in medical recovery, is how I knew that music and friendship could help paralyzed people walk again. The answer is that I didn't know. I just knew that everyone deserves to have someone believe in them completely, especially when they can't believe in themselves. His talk had gone viral, accumulating over 12 million views and inspiring the establishment of peer mentor programs in rehabilitation centers throughout the world. Jason had become the face of a movement that recognized young people not just as patients to be treated, but as healers whose natural empathy and lack of preconceived limitations made them uniquely effective at reaching patients whom traditional therapy couldn't help. Back in the Harvard lecture hall, Camille was fielding questions from the international audience, her responses demonstrating the kind of comprehensive understanding that comes from having experienced healing from both sides as patient and practitioner. Dr. Montgomery Thompson asked a neurologist from Tokyo, "How do you address the criticism that integrative approaches are too dependent on individual practitioner intuition to be systematically replicated?" Camille smiled, recognizing a question that her parents had been answering in various forms for the past decade. That's an excellent question that goes to the heart of how we understand medical expertise. Traditional medicine has focused on standardizing treatments, ensuring that every patient with a specific diagnosis receives identical care, regardless of who provides it. She moved away from the podium, her natural teaching instincts making the formal lecture feel more like an intimate conversation. But what we've discovered is that healing involves variables that can't be standardized: the patient's psychological state, their family dynamics, their cultural background, their previous experiences with medical trauma. Effective treatment requires practitioners who can assess and respond to these individual factors systematically. What we've developed isn't intuitive medicine, it's systematically personalized medicine. We've created diagnostic protocols for assessing emotional and psychological factors that influence physical healing, training programs that teach practitioners how to recognize and respond to individual patient needs, and outcome measurement tools that track both physical and emotional recovery. The response demonstrated the sophisticated thinking that had made Camille a respected voice in medical innovation. Despite her youth, she had grown up surrounded by the most advanced thinking about integrative medicine, but she had also experienced firsthand the difference between treatment that addresses symptoms and healing that transforms lives. After the conference concluded, Camille found herself walking through Boston Common with Dr. Harrison, their conversation ranging from professional developments to personal reflections on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. "You know," Dr. Harrison said, pausing beside the pond where ducks were enjoying the autumn afternoon, "when I first met your stepfather, I thought he was either delusional or dangerous. The idea that emotional healing could influence neurological recovery seemed to contradict everything I had learned about spinal cord injury." He smiled, shaking his head at the memory of his former skepticism. "Now I teach courses on emotional integration to neurology residents, and I've seen enough recoveries to know that what seems impossible is often just undiscovered. Your family taught me that the most dangerous thing in medicine isn't being wrong about treatment. It's being so certain that you're right that you stop looking for better answers." Their walk took them past St. Catherine's Medical Center, where a bronze plaque now marked the corridor where Lucas had first approached Brielle and Camille with his improbable offer of help. The inscription read, "In this place on October 15th, 2034, a simple act of faith between strangers began a transformation that would heal thousands of lives. Let me help her, Dr. Lucas Thompson." The plaque had been installed by the hospital administration after St. Catherine's had become the first major medical center to fully integrate emotional healing protocols into all their rehabilitation programs. The success rates had been so dramatic that other hospitals throughout the region had followed suit, creating a cascade of institutional change that had spread far beyond Boston. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if your mother had said no that day?" Dr. Harrison asked as they stood before the plaque. Camille considered the question seriously. "I think about it sometimes, but not with regret. I think about it with gratitude for all the small decisions that had to align perfectly for that moment to happen. Lucas had to choose to work at that hospital. My mother had to be desperate enough to listen to a stranger. I had to be open to believing that healing was possible." She touched the plaque gently, her fingers tracing the engraved words. But mostly, I think about all the families who are having their own "let me help her" moments right now, in hospitals and rehabilitation centers around the world. The real miracle isn't that I learned to walk again, it's that one family's willingness to trust unconventional wisdom created a pathway for thousands of other families to find hope. The conversation was interrupted by Camille's phone, which displayed a text message from the Global Institute's Coordination Center. A family in Mumbai had just contacted them about their 7-year-old son who had been paralyzed in a construction accident. The local doctors had exhausted conventional treatments, and the family had seen Camille's conference presentation online and wondered if the integrated approach might offer possibilities that hadn't been explored. "Another one," Camille said, showing Dr. Harrison the message. "Every week we get requests from families who have been told their situation is hopeless, but who still believe that there might be another way." She began composing a response, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. "We'll arrange for their local medical team to participate in our next virtual training program, and we'll assign one of our peer mentors to work with the boy through video sessions until we can arrange for direct consultation." Dr. Harrison watched her work, marveling at how naturally she had grown into the role of connecting desperate families with healing possibilities. "Your parents created something remarkable. You're the one who's making it truly global." "We're all making it global," Camille corrected. "Every family that chooses to believe in healing rather than limitation. Every doctor who decides to look beyond conventional protocols. Every young person who realizes they can help others heal. They're all part of making the impossible become possible." As they walked back toward the medical school, their conversation was joined by other conference attendees who had recognized Camille and wanted to discuss implementation of integrated protocols in their own facilities. Soon she was surrounded by an impromptu consultation session, fielding questions about training requirements, outcome measurement, and adaptation of protocols for different cultural contexts. Watching her interact with the international group of medical professionals, Dr. Harrison reflected on the extraordinary transformation that had begun with such humble circumstances. A maintenance worker approaching a desperate mother in a hospital corridor had ultimately resulted in a young woman who was now shaping global conversations about the future of medical practice. That evening, Camille joined her parents via video conference for their weekly family meeting, a tradition they had maintained despite increasingly busy schedules that often had them traveling to different continents. Lucas was calling from Vancouver, where he was consulting on a new pediatric rehabilitation center. Brielle was in Geneva, meeting with World Health Organization officials about establishing international standards for integrative neurological therapy. "How was your presentation?" Brielle asked, her pride in her daughter evident even through the pixelated video connection. "Good reception," Camille replied. Dr. Raymer announced that the European network will be implementing our peer mentor protocols in all 47 of their affiliated centers by next year. "And I got a message from that family in Mumbai we discussed last month. The construction accident case?" Lucas asked, immediately focusing on the medical details. "What's the latest assessment?" Their conversation continued for the next hour. A blend of family intimacy and professional consultation that perfectly captured how completely their personal and professional lives had become integrated around their shared mission of healing. They discussed specific patient cases, reviewed research data, planned future conference presentations, and shared updates about the twins' progress in their own early development programs. "I have news," Jason announced, appearing on screen from his Harvard dorm room. "Professor Martinez wants to include our peer mentor research in the new curriculum for first-year medical students. Starting next year, everyone entering medical school will learn about emotional integration as a standard part of their training." The announcement was met with enthusiastic celebration from the family members on screen. The integration of emotional healing into standard medical education had been one of their long-term goals, representing a fundamental shift in how future doctors would understand their role in the healing process. That means medical students will graduate already understanding that healing is about more than fixing what's broken. Lucas observed with satisfaction. They'll understand from the beginning that their job is to help patients remember what's possible, not just manage what's damaged. As their family meeting concluded with the usual exchange of love and encouragement, Camille found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. 10 years ago, she had been a paralyzed girl whose future seemed defined by limitation. Today, she was helping to define the future of medical practice for thousands of practitioners around the world. But the most profound realization was that the transformation hadn't really begun with her accident, or even with Lucas's offer to help. It had begun with a simple recognition that healing happens when people dare to believe in possibilities that seem impossible, and when they're willing to trust others who share that belief. Looking out her apartment window at the lights of Boston, stretching toward the horizon, Camille understood that somewhere in those lights were families facing their own impossible circumstances, parents desperate to help children who seemed beyond help, medical professionals struggling with the limitations of conventional approaches, young people trying to believe that their futures could be different from their present circumstances. Tomorrow, some of those families would find their way to centers that used the integrated approaches her family had pioneered. Some would connect with peer mentors who understood that healing happens through relationship as much as through treatment. Some would encounter medical professionals who had been trained to see possibilities rather than just limitations. In each of those encounters, the simple truth that Lucas had offered in that hospital corridor would continue to ripple outward. Sometimes the most profound healing begins with someone being brave enough to say, "Let me help," and someone else being wise enough to say, "Yes, yes." The girl who had learned to walk again had become a woman who was teaching the world new ways to heal. But more importantly, she had become part of a continuing story, one that began with faith, grew through trust, and continues to expand through every life it touches, one family at a time, one impossible possibility at a time. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.